Hello, my name is Nicole Aponte, and welcome to Historical and Philosophical Spotlight, Bartolome de Las Casas, in defense of the Indians. Let's take a look at the life and impact of Bartolome de Las Casas and how he was a reformer and activist, an advocate for indigenous people during his time. Bartolome de Las Casas was born in 1484 in Seville, Spain, and his father went on explorations with Christopher Columbus. No doubt this impacted de Las Casas, who also decided at the tender age of 18 to join Columbus on one of his journeys. Now, his future expeditions with Columbus would be through a different lens. De Las Casas became a priest, and so his goal was not riches and fame, but rather to share the good news of the gospel with the native people he would encounter and improve their welfare. However, he witnessed atrocities at the hands of Christopher Columbus and his men. And let me share a quote. De Las Casas wrote, "Those terrible things that the tyrants did, invent, pursue, and have committed against those peaceable, humble, and meek Indian peoples who offend no person." This quote through the National Humanities Center in 2006. So De Las Casas did write a book called A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies. In this book, he details how Columbus and his men maimed, kidnapped, mistreated, massacred, and basically committed a genocide against the Taino people of the Caribbean islands such as Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Jamaica. Now, this sort of treatment would continue on in places such as Mexico and Peru and other countries of South America. And unfortunately, the encomienda system of Spain was one that legally supported conquistadors to use authority in the lands that they were seeking to conquer so that they could basically establish this colonialism that was a part of the agenda of Spain at the time. Now, despite the law protecting these acts of barbarism, there was this prevailing thought in European society that Native American people were wild savages and that they were inept and unintelligent. And because they were so uncivilized, they needed to be subdued. So De Las Casas was coming against these prevailing thoughts of society. He was a forerunner in advocating for human rights for all people. Now, unfortunately, when the European people heard stories of how tribes such as the Tainos wore little to no clothing, they smoked and they worshipped elements of nature, they were on the side of committing that, yes, this was barbarism and it was their place in society to stop these acts, to convert the people to a more civilized way of life. However, De Las Casas had his moment in history where he was able to stand up in front of the royal court in Spain, and he went toe-to-toe with a famous Spanish philosopher. Dr. Gines de Sepulveda argued on the side of the colonists, saying that this was a just war because they merited this oppression by the Spanish conquistadors. He used Aristotle to support his views, saying that these people were natural slaves because they were not progressive, because they were uncivilized, that they merited this sort of behavior, and that it was an attempt to move civilization across the world in the right direction. Whereas De Las Casas championed for the Native American rights, and he used the Bible as his support, and he even used Augustine, saying that Augustine was opposed to brute force. And his famous quote, De Las Casas said, "All the world is human." At the end of the day, the court deemed this a draw. They saw justification on both sides, and the only thing that really came out of this was the 1573 ordinance, which meant that Spain would no longer use the word conquest to describe what they were doing across the world. However, many people were moved by the lengths that De Las Casas was willing to go to by going head to head with a philosopher of his time and challenging the perspectives of society to stand up for people that no one else was willing to risk their reputation for. Now, his divine plea was stemmed out of his desire to prevent a divine punishment that he felt was coming against Spain for all of the evil things that they were doing. And he also wanted European society to see the hypocrisy of their beliefs that just because the natives had barbaric ways did not mean that they were superior to another race of people, another culture. Because if they took a hard, introspective look at their own lives, there was barbarism coming out of their own country. Some of the medieval practices of torture and the things that were being done during that time period for conquest revealed barbarism in their own hearts and lives. Now, even though his impact was not one that brought about change in action, unfortunately, or legally, because the conquest continued through Mexico and South America, despite his voice being heard, he did change perspectives, and many people took a long, hard look at themselves and what was happening. And so throughout history, he is known as a forerunner of indigenous people's rights and as sparking that movement. However, criticism against De Las Casas would be, why did he champion for Native Americans and not for African Americans? Africans were being stolen, were being sold, and were being mistreated, and he did nothing to defend them. In conclusion, this is a historical and philosophical spotlight on Bartolome de Las Casas and his advocacy for indigenous people as he went toe-to-toe with a philosopher of his time to stand up against this prevailing perspective of barbarism and European superiority to champion for marginalized people groups.